And I don't need to do anything with these earphones, right? They're just sitting there.
No, yeah, just leave that.
All right.
I'll just switch it.
Thanks
to the
All right, then means I'll be bending.
Then they all walk when
Really good.
that's our next appointment.
All right. Shall I start?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So there's the title and my name, and I have a slightly different script than you do. Mine's longer. Yours is outlined to help follow along. But the first thing is I'm very happy to be here talking about this. Grace invited me. We hadn't met. Wasn't quite sure why I was invited, but I was honored and flattered. And like I just said to Petra, I said, "Are you nervous and excited?" And I said, "Well, it's nice to talk to a group who I feel has shared values, because I do get to talk about my work a lot as an academic, but it's not always in the context of people who share values or a vision or are interested in doing the same things I am." So I've been working on cooperatives. I lost my actual longer script, but that's okay. I've been working on cooperatives for a long time, since before 2004, but, next slide, please. All right, so that's just the earth. I actually tried to relate my talk and my work to the ARC and to the project that we're working on collectively, and also to the throat chakra, because I knew that I was the throat chakra day. So I've been working on cooperatives for a while. I've been working on cooperatives in India, women's cooperatives in India since 2004, and I've been going over there to do research with grassroots women's groups. And I think that cooperatives are really important for 4 reasons, actually. Well, 3, but there are more. Because first of all, primarily when people think of cooperatives, so I'm interested in producer cooperatives, like ones that produce textiles or make objects or clothing. Most of the time they're called craft cooperatives, but most of the ones that I look at produce textiles, although one has a whole range, like they have a midwives cooperative and a dairy cooperative and all sorts of agricultural cooperatives as well. So first of all, cooperatives are important, I think, because they, central to them are fair and just human relationships, human social and economic relationships. But it's more than that. That's the first thing people usually think about in cooperatives, because cooperative workplaces are, about labor and fairness and justice and fair conditions, safe conditions. But also another thing about cooperatives is they're environmentally responsible. So environmental responsibility is a huge thing. There's no cooperative that I know of that is not, does not use environmentally responsible methods or techniques. And then the other thing about cooperatives that's important, I think, to me, and why I think they're a good model for social justice work, is that instead of denying a person's identity or community or traditions, they incorporate them. And in fact, that's a really big part of the ones that I work on, because they're art-based. I mean, they're craft, but they're art, so they're batik, they're tie-dye, they're block printing. They're kinds of arts that have been in India for a long, long time, that actually died out for a while, but then are supported now through these smaller economic units. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was that. That's what I just said. And then there's some examples of cooperatives like Shade Grown Coffee. I don't really work on agricultural cooperatives a lot, but I mostly do the traditional textiles, and the dyeing methods and the printing methods are traditional. Next slide, please. Oh, is that really the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you skip a couple? Okay, wait, back to methodology. Okay, so the methodology, I'm a philosopher by training, and so when I was first asked to, when I first started doing this work, the article was published in a journal called Journal of Developing Societies, which is not a philosophy journal. And they said, you need a methodology section. I said, methodology? I don't have a methodology. What are you talking about? As a social science thing. But since it's, since that's kind of a social science journal, it's a it's a development journal. So my methodology is action-oriented, it's participant observer based on qualitative research, which means I go and I hang out in the community and I listen and I talk. And I sometimes come with open-ended questions. I usually do, and I have to go through our institutional research board at school to do it. So, I have questions like, have your relationships with your children changed since you started working? Or something like, what do you value most about working here? things like that. So usually I hang out for a while, a couple weeks, a month. It's not the same as anthropological research. And then another important thing, I'm a feminist, both in my regular life, my personal life, and also my theoretical work. And one thing that's really important there is to think about the power differentials in terms of race, class, gender, ethnicity, white privilege, global north, global south relationships. So I try to bring to the work that I do an awareness of the power differentials of the people I'm interacting with, and also a sense of reciprocity, and that differs with different groups. Like one group asked me to hold sales in the US of their products as a reciprocity for going there and learning from them and observing them, and I did that with my students several times actually. And another group actually, so many more people research them, and they actually have a fee you have to pay. So so there are different kinds of reciprocity depending on the group. Next slide, please. The skills required, we used some of them today. So deep listening, because if you're doing qualitative ethnographic research, you really have to listen to people's stories. I'm not interested in imposing what I think, I'm interested in learning from them. Open-mindedness, you have to kind of go in not thinking you know the answer. Empathy and compassion. Most of the groups that I am learning from are extremely poor. They have very different life circumstances than not only me, but most of the people in the global north. Not all, but most. Commitment to social justice, so I do this work so that I can amplify these stories and tell them and try to move people towards wanting to do something, and also learning from these groups because they have a great method of a holistic idea about how things could move forward. The valuing of grassroots activism, so learning from the people who are doing, and the valuing and validating of local, indigenous, and marginalized knowledges, which Edgardo's talk was a lot about that. So, you know, they know things about plants and dyes and how to do things, and about medicinal herbs. Actually, they're not shamans, they're not trained, but many of the groups that I work with do include, of course, indigenous people in India. So those are the skills required that I've developed along the way, and I'm still developing. Yeah. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when I thought about its relation to the throat chakra, which I did, I thought, well, what does my work have to do with the throat chakra? Like, why did Grace assign me the throat chakra? No, so what does that have to do with the throat chakra? So feminism, there's a lot of metaphors about voice in feminist work and feminist theory, a lot of them. So I just found a few of them, and so this is actually from anyway, these are quotes from famous people, but these metaphors run throughout. So the whole idea of giving voice to the marginalized, to the subaltern, to, you know, there's a lot of different terms for it, and then there's all sorts of questions about representing the other and how you shouldn't do that and what you should do, and you know, again, being aware of like power and privilege. But I think about my work as amplifying the voices and helping to give a wider audience to voices that are already there. I'm not actually giving voice, they have their own voices, but I'm amplifying those voices and helping to extend the platform. So there's a couple quotes, one from Bensler, give voice to what you know to be true and do not be afraid of being disliked or exiled. I think that that's the hard work of standing up for what you see. And another from Madeleine Albright, it took me quite a long time to develop a voice, and now that I have it, I'm not going to be silent. And these are, I mean, if you ever do any reading in feminist literature, I mean, voice is a huge metaphor. Next slide, please. And then the importance of stories, storytelling, narrative, and talking. And this is like a huge thing about how these women work together. But it's sort of like the old quilting circles in the US, that they're working together on a project, you're talking and you're sharing and telling stories. And a lot of times you're finding you're sharing things that make you want to move to collective action, or you share your experience and you find out you're not alone. There are other people who, you know, are subject to domestic violence, and there's something you can do about it, and blah, blah, blah. All right, so this is from Isabel Allende. Sisters, talk to each other, be connected and informed, from women for women's circles, share your stories, work together, and take risks together. We are invincible. So a lot of my interest in the cooperatives is that they they're really based on collective action, right? They're not individualist, and it's a very different paradigm than the Western global north. To develop people's empowerment and sense of agency, but to develop that in a way that they know that their individual success is tied to the group. And I don't think we do enough of that in the US anyway. All right, next slide, please. Oh yeah. So the throat chakra, we already know about that. We've already meditated on that. But so it's well, I won't read that part, but I just tried to think about the ways that my work was connected to that, and the way I thought about it most was communication and giving voice. Next slide, please. All right, now this is my favorite quote. This is actually the at the very beginning of a book I'm writing, actually just finishing. It's from an Indian woman who's an activist and a theorist. Clearly, we need to build a new language in which to frame our vision and strategies for social transformation at the local, national, or global level. I, for one, intend to do so not by rereading Foucault or Gramsci or other great political philosophers, but by listening to poor women and their movements, listening to their values, principles, articulations, and actions, and by trying to hear how they frame their search for justice. From this, I suspect, will emerge not only a new discourse, but also new concepts and strategies that have not yet entered our political or philosophical imaginations. So I think her quote captures what I'm aiming to do. It's ironic too, because I've written a book on Foucault and this one doesn't have anything to do. So I love that quote. It's like, yeah, here, throw away the old theory and just go out and listen to grassroots activists. All right, next slide, please. And then another quote that's really important to me, another kind of framing. So these I call framing quotes that kind of frame my project, my larger project, and also my talk. Chandra Talpad Mohanty is an Indian feminist. She's a theorist. She's very well known. She grew up in Mumbai and she teaches at Syracuse in the US. And so it's part of feminist theory, and also kind of like what I see these women doing, the grassroots activists, is it's a more inclusive feminist vision or politics, a feminist politics that would be decolonizing, anti-capitalist, and allow for solidarity. Next slide, please. I can talk on and talk about. And then cooperation and collaboration is really important, both within the cooperatives and in general, theoretically, methodologically. If you have come to help me, I don't need your help. But if you've come because your liberation is tied to mine, come, let us work together. Mm-hmm. And Lila Watson is an Australian Aboriginal. And it's about, again, this whole thing about not being a colonialist or an imperialist when you're working across lines like economic lines or social lines or caste lines or cultural lines or differences of power, wealth, and privilege. And I love it because I actually really believe that our lives are tied together. I think people who don't recognize the basic fact of interdependence are fooling themselves, and that's part of the reason that we're sort of like down the path we're down, because we think of ourselves as independent from one another and from the environment. And so this is all about, like, don't like think that you're in here waging my battle, you know, for me, or that you're helping me out. It's like we're in it together, right? If I'm white, I should be an anti-racist, not because I'm helping someone who's not white, but because the system of racism is detrimental to all of us and we're all implicated in it. All right, next slide, please. Oh, globalization. So my work on no, that's good. You're going to have to backtrack in a minute, though. Okay. So globalization. So my work is framed within the context of globalization, and this is sort of, I didn't know who would be here. I don't know what people's kind of like what you know and what you don't know, so it might be like very basic to some of you or most of you, but I work a lot about globalization because there are these larger structures, mainly economic, but also political, in which we all live and that have effects, and they have very specific effects on poor people in developing, so-called developing countries in the global south. So what is globalization? Next slide, please. What is globalization? Okay, the world has become increasingly interconnected through trade, so this is the very basic understanding of it, and then I'm going to tell you about the adverse effects. So, you know, basically globalization is that we've become increasingly interconnected through trade and technology. Now I think you just press it and something else will appear. There we go. Removal of trade barriers and free trade agreements are part of globalization. Press it again, please. The loans to developing countries, which had really adverse effects, and press it again, please. And then technology allows faster spread of new ideas, money, and the movement of people, which can be positive or negative. So one of the things about globalization is it has a differential impact by gender, and women are much more negatively affected by globalization than men for reasons which I will tell you about now when Rebecca presses the button. Okay, has it helped or hurt women? Well, I already gave that away. It's hurt women. Next slide, please. It's hurt women, and this is these are some of the reasons why. There's other reasons, and not exactly going in order since I don't have my notes there in the bag. So women are among the poorest in the world. I don't know if any of you have heard the term the feminization of poverty. It was a term that was coined by an economist in the US, but there's a global feminization of poverty. So women are among the poorest people in the world. So there's a lot of people living in poverty in the world, and even among the people living in poverty, women are substantially poorer. They die at larger rates, they suffer from malnutrition more often, they're excluded from paid labor. When they do work in the workplace, they might be working in informal labor, which is not regularized and so therefore not regulated, no safety standards, no food security, no job security. The other thing is when they are, right, through the process of globalization, as we all know, there's been a lot of outsourcing of corporations, multinationals who don't really have, a conscience and don't really adhere to good labor practices, and women are seen as flexible labor. Oftentimes they weren't employed until something like a large factory comes in, like the classic example is the maquilladoras that are just over the Mexican, the US-Mexican border in Mexico, and one of the things about the globalization and the kind of like the flow of capital and labor, but mostly capital, is that they created the EPZs and FTZs, so the free trade zones and the export processing zones, and those are tax-free zones that multinational and transnational corporations can have their factories in, and they don't pay any taxes. And then they also basically, none of the rules of the country, so like say Old Navy, for instance, or the Gap, let's pick on the Gap. Say the Gap has a factory in Mexico. So they don't really have to, like Mexico, as far as I know, doesn't have a minimum wage law, but even if they did, it would be so much lower than the US because the economies are so different. And then they don't have to follow any of the safety standards and stuff. And the corporations also get a tax break. So women are mainly employed in these maquilladoras, which are the garment factories, and they're all over the world, of course, Bangladesh, Thailand, especially in Asia, Southeast Asia, and Mexico, Latin America, but especially in Mexico, not so much farther down. It's mainly women who are employed. They're considered, I didn't put this up here, but women are employed for this kind of work. It's the light industries, first the heavy industries like mining, construction, stuff like that. That's mainly men. But the light industries are like making computer chips, assembling batteries, assembling small toys, doing embroidery, doing sewing. And it's because women are considered particularly well suited because of the feminine qualities of nimble fingers. It's called the nimble fingers discourse. They're nimble fingers, and also the other reasons women are the preferred employees in these places is that they're seen to be more compliant. They often employ young women and they have them live in dorms, and so when they deduct the housing from their labor, and they don't really make enough to leave, and they're less likely to unionize, women are, and things like that. Okay, so, and then the other bad thing is, and there's a bunch of documentaries about this, if you're interested you can just go online and find them, but a lot of times the women are subjected, of course, to sexual harassment, and in extreme cases, rape. So they're really a kind of, right, they've usually migrated from rural areas, agricultural areas where there's they're kind of the farming, right, because we subsidize the corn in the U.S., and so then we flooded the market in Mexico, so then that puts small farmers out of work, so then people don't have any money, and they can't work the farm, so then they have to go and work in these factories where they are basically kind of like captive because they have to work and they need money and they need to send it back, and then they're subject to all sorts of sexual harassment, and they're usually young women who have left their families and don't have a support system within the city or community. All right, next slide, please. All right, so why women? Well, there's a lot of reasons my research focuses on women. One is that women, so through the development literature, women actually I don't want to say the canary in the mine, but their fates are tied to the future generation, partly because it's well documented that, women, when they do get money, they use it primarily first for the needs of their family, their children. So they'll use it to buy milk and food and to serve the family. And so this is just something from the United Nations Development Report. Women's empowerment helps to raise economic productivity and reduce infant mortality. It contributes to improved health and nutrition and increases the chance of education for the next generation. And it's because when women have control of the money, and of course when they're earning it, there's a greater chance to have control of it, they use that money for their children. So it improves the welfare of everybody. Next slide, please. Oh, now I do need my real notes. All right. So now, no, can you go back a minute?
Mm-hmm.
All the way back
To that first slide that was...
Yeah, the one I had you skip. That one, okay. So these are the main points. Oh, actually, I guess it was in the right order, sorry. So this is sort of like the main points that I'm making in the order of the presentation. So the one I just talked about was, in spite of the many benefits of globalization, and there are some, I mean, we wouldn't be here without certain forms of technology and, transportation and all that stuff. Women are often adversely impacted by it for the reasons that I talked about. Women's economic status improves the overall status, including health and empowerment of their families, and then also, therefore, their communities. That's the thing I just talked about. And then now my research focuses in on their economic status through working in cooperatives, which are not just jobs. So one way to improve women's economic status is through organizations that create jobs and provide the training and support necessary for women with limited resources and education to earn a decent living. And then I'm going to talk about, in a minute, the values and outcomes of the organizations that I've worked on in India. And one is called the Self-Employed Women's Association, also abbreviated as SEWA. And then one is Marketplace India. That's the one that is not very well researched. That's pretty small. And another one is Threads of Life, and that's actually in Indonesia. And I've gone up there a few times to do research, but I've done less formal research on that one. All right, now please go ahead to the quote, the United Nations quote, where we were. Okay. So while you're doing that, so I want to talk
back to
one back. Okay. So I want to connect this up to sort of the larger thinking about nonviolence, which is another thing that I teach about and think about. So a lot of times we associate nonviolence with the lack of physical force, right? We think about nonviolence as not being aggressive or hitting someone with physical force. And then sometimes we, reflect and we think, okay, well, there's also psychological violence, there's emotional violence. But Gandhi actually had a much broader idea of nonviolence, or ahimsa. And for Gandhi, nonviolence included passive violence. And passive violence doesn't have to do with emotional or psychological violence. Passive violence actually has to do with not recognizing the impact of your actions on others. And so one of the things that he talked about was the way that people waste things, that people waste resources individually. And he said that, like, for instance, an example of passive violence would be the way that excessive material consumption or the use of resources actually harms workers through exploiting their labor and depriving them of basic necessities. So, sort of like the basic idea that for some people to live very well, other people are exploited, and if you're living well and you're throwing away a lot of food or you're wasting things, then someone has to do the labor to produce those things, and that labor is generally, under the current circumstances, people who are not receiving a fair wage, and they're living at a much lower economic level than the person wasting. Violence here is understood as structural or systemic. One's actions or lack of action has far-reaching effects and consequences. Thus, poverty itself is a type of violence. So he actually defines poverty as violence, and it's actually structural violence. Next slide, please. Okay. Sananda. Mumbai, 2004. I walk through the narrow lanes of a poor community. Corrugated tin shacks open to the elements, cook fires burning inside, clothes drying on the open walls. Roosters run underfoot. Dogs and children play in the lanes. Raw sewage rushes by our feet. Udon Mandal employs women, especially widows, to sew and embroider clothing, paying a fair wage, and provide safe and humane working conditions. The space is no more than 10 by 12 feet, full of women talking, laughing, and sewing. They interrupt their work to talk with me and drink tea. Sunanda, widowed 10 years earlier, begins to speak. When my husband died, I didn't know what to do. I had 2 small children and a blind mother to support. My in-laws were cruel to me and wanted nothing more to do with me after my husband's death. They actually kicked her out. First they beat her and then they kicked her out. Tears welling up in her eyes, she says softly, I thought of killing myself. But Sunanda did not commit suicide. Instead, she became a part of the cooperative Udon Mandal in India, in Marketplace, India, which specifically is for widows, because widows have much less opportunity than married women or unmarried women to get work. She was able to earn enough through this work, which is fairly paid and actually higher than the average wage, of course, to support herself, her 2 children, and her mother. So, next slide, please. Okay, so SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association. The Self-Employed Women's Association was founded in 1972 by Ela Bhatt. It was originally part of the Textile Labor Association, which was a labor union influenced by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi that emphasized mediation and negotiation rather than litigation to resolve disputes between labor and capital. The Gandhian principles that underlay the Textile Labor Association were also to infuse the Self-Employed Women's Association, especially Gandhi's ideas about the dignity of labor, the importance of human values, and nonviolence. Taken together, these principles indict poverty in several ways. As Ela Bhatt says, quote, poverty is wrong because it is violent. It does not respect human labor. It strips a person of his or her humanity, and it takes away their freedom, end quote. SEWA itself defines itself as a movement, not a program. So it's like it's a social movement. It's a member-based organization. Each member has to, it's a member-based organization. The needs and the goals of the members are given priority. So there's no kind of like master planner. It's not a top-down organization. It's a bottom-up organization. The common denominator is each member's desire to earn enough to provide the basic necessities for herself and her family. So I can say more about how it started and why and give particular examples, but I'm going to keep going because I don't want to run out of time.
We're just going to take a picture.
Pardon?
Oh, this. Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. Oh yeah, next slide, please. All right. So that's sort of office space. Again, these spaces are so cute. They're like as big as the tables we eat on, and so and there's very few chairs. So the self-employed. Oh yeah, okay. So their main goal is to organize women workers for full employment, and I love the poster, but we can go back to that in a minute. But so the Self-Employed Women's Association is to organize women workers for full employment and self-reliance. And it's interesting what this means here, because it's not at all what it means like in the U.S. Full employment means security with regard to work and income. So it's actually about food security, as well as security to cover basic needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare. So a lot of people that work there are homeless when they start, or they live in the urban slums. So they live on land, you know, they're squatting on land, and their houses are made of cardboard and sometimes tin if they're extra lucky. Okay, so far I've stressed the importance of economic issues and the role that SEWA plays in securing a livelihood for its members, which is not a small thing if you're starving. But SEWA also stresses the values of collectivity, solidarity, and then economic and social justice in general are important to SEWA's work. Moreover, the Gandhian principles of respect for human dignity and human equality are explicitly stated as integral to SEWA's mission. So, for example, the caste system is still, even though it's outlawed in India and has been since the 50s, it's still in operation informally. But the Self-Employed Women's Association specifically has groups working together that are from different castes And then there's a lot of animosity in some parts of India between Hindus and Muslims. And SEWA was founded in Ahmedabad, in the state of Gujarat, in the city of Ahmedabad. And that's one of the cities where the riots have been really horrible. A lot of people have died, entire neighborhoods were burned down. And SEWA, the cooperatives are also interreligious, so they're intercaste, they're intercultural, they're interethnic group, they're interlinguistic, they're interreligious. And SEWA actually played a big role in one of the more recent, which I think it was 2004, 2006, so one of the more recent, there hasn't been one in about 10 years, but a huge riot actually that devastated neighborhoods and a lot of people died. Then the Hindus and the Muslims were separated into camps because of course their houses were, there was nothing left, so they were set up camps. And SEWA was instrumental in bringing the two groups together because the women already knew each other because they'd worked together for years, and so their work connects to the larger community of sort of healing these kinds of rifts and divisions. And then in terms of social equality, so the caste system, has this idea of hierarchy and inequality and social inequality and, different levels of worth. And SEWA doesn't buy into any of that. And actually most of the women, so poverty and caste are related. Not everyone who's poor is from a lower caste, and not everyone from a lower caste is poor, but the larger number of people who are poor are from the lower castes, but they explicitly are open to anyone at any caste if they're poor, and so also the mixing of the caste is something that's not done all the time, and SEWA is explicitly interested in social equality and gender equality. That's another thing that they're sort of like working against the dominant cultural norm, not just in India, but everywhere. All right. Okay, the validation the women experience, particularly from their peers, when they meet together in small groups to discuss the problems and issues they're facing, is important for establishing the connection among the women, and it also fosters feelings of self-respect. So one of the things about this work is it's both internal work, it's empowerment work, and then it translates out into collective action, which is why I think it's such a good model. Possibly similar to what we're doing here. All right. Once the needs and members of the community are identified, SEWA works with them to build the capacity to accomplish their goals. So these women are working in an office, and they're doing some of the work that needs to be done to support the cooperatives. They might have to keep track of things or keep books or keep accounts, but mostly it's not taking people and putting them in an office and having them do work. So there was a group of dairy farmers, but they were not really, they were all working individually, so it was hard for them because they didn't have a way to refrigerate or collect, and they were all poor, so no one really had the money for a veterinarian when the cows got sick, and then sometimes a cow would get sick and pass it on to the other cows. And by forming a cooperative, they pooled their resources. They have one central place for collecting the milk and then for distributing it, and they also pool their resources so that when they do have an illness among the cows, they can afford to get the veterinarian. Of course, that benefits everyone because if the disease is contagious, then it doesn't spread, but also just because it's better for everyone that the community is taken care of and everyone can contribute to this basically milk bank. And I went there too. I don't think I have any slides of that, but that's pretty awesome. The dairy cooperative and the midwife cooperative. All right, next slide, please. So, and then, as I said, I'm particularly interested in textiles. And one of the things that is specific to India, as far as I know, is block print and block printing. And all right, and so this is a slide from SEWA. And it's block printing. So this is a cooperative too, so it's a production cooperative, and then they have a store that sells it. And again, the infrastructure, so these skills, most of the time the women know these skills, and there's a lot of rural to urban migration in India as well as other places. And so they might have learned these skills at home, especially block printing is passed down from generations. On my most recent trip to India, we went to an organization that was like a cultural and arts organization specifically devoted to sustaining these traditions. And it was a guy who was block printing, and the block print he had was from 4 generations in his family. So block prints are very specific, and they carry identity and community and memory, and they're passed down within families for generations. And he he could tell us the story of it, what it meant, and that it had been his great-great-grandfather's. Okay, so what SEWA tries to do is, like, if the women in the community have embroidery skills, but they live in a remote area where there's not a market for their embroidery, SEWA helps them organize into cooperative groups, and then several cooperatives pool their resources to transport their goods to the city. So they might even eventually be able to buy a van, or if they can't buy a van at first, they would get together, pool their resources, and one person would go in a shared transport, which, without pooling the resources, they don't have the money to do that, because they're not cash-based, they're not living in a cash-based economy, right? And so, they also don't have enough to eat. All right, so, and then, like I said, the office picture, each cooperative is an entity with collective resources, so some people need to be trained to keep the accounts and tend to administrative matters, so those are also skills that are learned within it, and those skills also empower the women. As the women learn these new skills, their confidence grows. This increased confidence is in itself positive, and it empowers the women whose lives are difficult and whose work has been invisible. This empowerment often translates into the ability to make changes in their personal lives, such as exercising more decision-making power in the family, or even leaving an abusive situation. And in addition to the woman who was going to commit suicide or thought of committing suicide, I heard several stories from women that I talked to about being in situations of domestic abuse, and before they had both the social support of other women and also a kind of an economic way out, some a little bit of economic independence. They didn't even think about leaving the situation. And most of them, because India is very family-oriented and relationships are valued, they weren't interested in divorcing. They just wanted the abuse to stop. But one woman moved out, and she was able to move into a coworker's home, and the entire cooperative went to the house and basically berated the man for abusing his wife, and then she just stayed, and then he finally stopped drinking and promised not to abuse her, and then she moved back in, and that was it. So, there's different methods, right? So it's not like a relationship has to permanently end, but things have to transform, and things do. All right. So.
Wait, are we allowed to ask questions?
Is it okay to ask her?
Yeah.
Okay.
I talk really fast. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So in that context, because this is so empowering, and there's kind of usually forces and sources that hold oppression in play, do you experience resistance of the larger culture from this, and/or specific? Are there ways they're vulnerable to the larger community, or ways that they protect themselves against things that don't like this?
Yes. There's especially resistance within some of the women's families when they first start to go out to work. Sometimes it's from the in-laws, so the structure there's the extended family, and women move in with the husband's parents. So sometimes the resistance is from the in-laws, but also often the husband. But if the woman goes out to work anyway and begins to earn an income, because the income they're earning is so proportionately greater, and most of the time, if they have a spouse, and most of them do have a spouse, their spouse is not able to earn sufficiently to meet the family's needs. So maybe the spouse is employed in seasonal labor, like construction, or maybe the spouse, like in a lot of cases, they had become ill or were disabled, and of course India doesn't have the same social safety net as Europe and the US, and so when that happens, you just sort of SOL, if I could say that, and feel shit out of luck. So sometimes there's resistance at first, but usually the resistance within the family is overcome as soon as the benefit is realized, because it benefits the whole family. So even though I'm looking at women's cooperatives, again, it's not this model where like the women go out and then separate themselves from the family, and they're like, off doing a separatist commune, which is more like the state's model. But what they're doing is they're in a gender segregated group, which is also really important, especially to the Muslim women, because they are supposed to be not around men except men in their family. So it actually kind of conforms to certain cultural norms and then goes against other cultural norms. So I actually think it's brilliant, because it's sort of like this way to empower subtly. So the resistance is usually overcome. I haven't heard of a case, which doesn't mean it doesn't happen, where someone started to work or wanted to work except for, like, for instance, the domestic violence increased or they were restricted from going. Usually if someone goes out and starts to work, then the benefits, the economic benefits, because they benefit the entire family unit, then that resistance breaks down. The groups also, and I don't think I do talk about this later in the presentation, so I'll tell you, so these groups also do a lot of political activism, and that's actually a part of the group. So it's not like this thing where they just go to work or, you know, do these like, you know, sewing circles. They actually do like demonstrations, like they were being cheated. There's a ration system in India for oil and rice, you know, sort of like, you know, not food stamps, but you know, it's literally a food ration system for poor people. And they were being shorted by the people giving the oil and rice. They were cheating them out of it. They were like, the scales were, they had weighted the scales. So, you know, the women knew they were being cheated out of it because, you know, they would go home and like, hey, this isn't, you know, a gallon of oil, cooking oil. So they did demonstrations in the city, and then they, well, they did a lot of things. First, they talked to government officials, but that didn't work. Then they had they had one woman go and get her rations. They told the police, the municipal police, and the one woman would get her rations, then another person would be waiting outside the police, and then, but that didn't, you know, and then they started demonstrating, and that actually changed it, and it got the attention of the national government. So they do a lot of things that, in addition to just going out and working and making money and bringing it home, they're doing a lot of things that have a positive impact on their entire poor community. Another group, their action was to get the sewers covered. So when I said you're walking by raw sewage, I mean it. And so these are urban slums. There's no infrastructure, there's no water, there's often no electricity, there's no sewage system. So in one community, all their sewage was open. And of course, not only does it stink to have, you know, raw human sewage floating by, but it breeds mosquitoes, which are malarial. People would fall in them, children would fall in them. And their project, their activist project, was to get the sewers covered, and they did it. I mean, it took them months, and they, you know, they had a whole campaign. So this is like, it's like political organizing. So anyway, so because these things benefit the whole community,
they start being a hero more than a villain.
Exactly. Well,
cool.
and, not always the hero, but at least valued. Yes.
Yeah, so my question to do that then, so what do you think in comparison to Western third-wave feminism? Like, what lessons can they teach feminists here? If you see what I mean? Like, where is feminism going?
Well, I think that one of the reasons I got interested in this project was that it's more about the second than the third, but I'll answer your question too. But one of the reasons I got interested, Well, one of the reasons I got interested in the project was that feminism in the U.S. and then also Europe, actually kind of like Anglo-speaking feminism, to me was so focused on legal and political rights. You know, like, oh, you know, the right to have an abortion, the right to vote, you know, and even though those rights are important, don't get me wrong. At first, when I would talk about this, people were like, so you know, yes, I'm all for political legal rights for women. But when you travel, and when you travel outside the U.S. especially, you know, more than 2/3 of the world lives in poverty, you know, and so you can't really, like, the women that work in these organizations are illiterate. They could vote, but they couldn't get there to vote anyway because they don't have transportation. So to me, one of the reasons I got interested in it was I think economic and social rights are extremely important. And I think the rights discourse, it misses the mark in general. I think it's a more holistic discourse, social justice. And so what I think the third wave, so the second wave is like the one that focused like, oh, you know, like equal rights now, all that stuff. So the third wave, I think that feminism in the U.S. sort of got diverted into identity politics debates a lot, and you know, like sort of like it's not that I dismiss identity politics either. I think it's important to speak from your own experience. I think it's important to recognize oppression and marginalized groups, but I think that there are a lot of like the Marxist and socialist feminist insights, which I think are really important, is that, you know, we do live, you know, we're embodied and we live in material economic circumstances. And those are very basic. Those are at the first chakra level, right? Those are about security, food security, having enough to eat, having shelter, being, you know, safe from violence. So those things I think feminism has ignored. I think actually feminism in the U.S. has become very insular. It doesn't have a larger global perspective. It's more about what's going on in, you know, sort of like, I think it really has sort of spoken more to the middle and upper middle class. even though there's a lot of great organizations still in the US that are working, collectives that are working more about economic issues and more, I would say more fundamental issues. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so now in the current debate, like with what Trump's trying to obviously reverse a lot of that stuff.
With what?
With Trump trying to reverse all the stuff, you know, like get rid of
Yes.
abortion,
Yes.
You know, how do you think, you know, and people's security is being threatened? Not maybe not food security, but some sort of feeling of insecurity has come. How do you think that that can balance out? You know.
Well, I mean, part of my
through learning through what these women
yes.
are teaching.
Part of my interest is to see how dominant nation states like the U.S., how our policies affect other places in the world, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the whole globalization part. But in terms of like the Trump, and what he's doing in the U.S., you know, I think it's important for us feminists and everyone to work on a lot of different fronts. I don't think there's just like one way to work on things or to be an activist, or because of course we have to protect those rights. We don't want to roll back political and legal rights. That's not so in the US, we do need to make sure that those things aren't taken away, right? That those legal, you know, like the kind of, you know, Marriage Equality Act and abortion, Roe v. Wade, all those things. We need to still work on those, but with a consciousness that that's only one arena. And there's a term, I think actually Mohanty coined it, but I'm not completely sure, but the two-thirds world. So, you know, it used to be like the first world and third world. People used to call like, you know, wealthy countries, US and Europe, first world and developing countries. Third world now, usually it's global north and global south, but basically is wealthy countries and the countries that the wealthy countries colonized and exploited. So, in terms of, I think we need to sort of have like a double consciousness where you need to work in your own arena within your nation state on those laws and make sure that those are not eroded or, you know, kind of like you don't regress there. But you also need to have like that double vision where you're looking at the larger world and the ways that your country's foreign policy and economic policy is having detrimental effects on other places, and that might play itself out on the social and economic level, like social rights and economic rights.
So now, basically, there's more solidarity from the both groups,
Mm-hmm.
because they're both going to meet in the middle
Mm-hmm.
from having issues. Sort of because it's going to balance out. The more survival issues you have in America, at the same time as more feminism is coming up in other countries, it's going to balance out. You know, there's going to be like a bridge.
I think so.
And even easier to have like solidarity.
Even if there's not a bridge, we'll be able to work on multiple fronts on different issues and value and recognize the impact of one place on the other place. So yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I also think in the U.S. a lot of times the discourse is like, oh, the U.S. is blah, 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 like wealthy, privileged, white. Well, of course it's not. I mean, there's a lot of poor people in the United States. Sometimes people ask me when I talk about my work, like, well, why are you doing your work in India? There's poor people in the United States. It's like, yes, there are. I mean, so there's a lot of poor people everywhere. And so I think that once the really, you know, adverse effects of some of Trump's policies are felt, and people rise up, and then we'll start paying attention to those issues again. But people have to unbuy out of the whole like myth of meritocracy and exceptionalism, both individual exceptionalism and American exceptionalism. Anyway, shall I go back to my script and we can?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So block print, yes. I love it. I think it's beautiful. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So there's some more block print. And it's amazing, the work. It's so detailed and, you know, mirrors and embroidery, and a lot of them have multiple techniques like batik and tie-dyeing. Usually block print is just block print on the plain white cotton, but then these are actually batiks. So, all right, okay. Oh, one more thing. That's slide 22. I have no idea what slide. I should have numbered them. All right. So, yeah, I talked about this. So, this is one of the things that I love about these arts textile traditions, and that a lot of the women are doing in the cooperatives that I study, is that there's this real tie to tradition and identity, and it's a tie that's so much denied and devalued in actually a lot of Western countries or the global North, and also that art is a part of everyday life. And I haven't talked much about this, and I won't here, but I'm still trying to think through. So it's also this distinction between art and craft that the artists might be more aware of than I am, or people who write on art theory and aesthetics. But this distinction was challenged by feminists and feminist aesthetics, that a lot of the women work that women do, and then there's like the G's Bend quilts in the U.S. that the African American women did in the, I think, 40s or 50s, a while ago. But we had the display in the Orlando Art Museum, and they're amazing. So a lot of times that craft art distinction has ruled things out of being considered art. But I think in India, at least as far as I'm concerned, that's not the case. Art is still integrated into everyday life, and these are bed sheets. These are things these aren't wall hangings. These are like things that people are going to buy and use in their houses, and it just makes this. It means that aesthetics and beauty isn't divorced from everyday life, which I think also is really important. Next slide, please. And here's some more. So now this is Threads of Life in Indonesia. So if you ever go, next time you're in Bali, no, just kidding. If you ever go to Indonesia and you go to Bali, there's this great, wonderful gallery, actually. It's a store and a gallery. And what they did is they went into communities which were traditionally embroidery and weaving communities, but the techniques had been lost, partly because they weren't able to earn a living, and now we're a cash-based economy. So they had done other things, or in this case, so these are nice descriptions, and you can read them at your leisure. I don't have them written down here, but the important thing for me is that the villagers, it takes sometimes years actually to make some of the pieces that they make, years. So they had no incentive, right? Because they don't have any way to make a living. They can't spend all your time weaving if you don't have any money and you're not eating. So they gave it up, or they started to, it says villagers had no incentive to invest that kind of time and effort in a single cloth. Very few people continued to make them, but they gave up the hand spinning for commercial thread and natural colors for synthetic dyes. And here's the connection to the environment. During the Asian monetary crisis, they were struggling to keep up with school fees and medical bills, and they actually had to sell heirloom textiles. So some of these textiles aren't made anyway for consumption or for sale. They're made to keep in the family. They're actually an important part of, like I said, community, tradition, identity, family lineage. And then Threads of Life, what it does is it helps weavers and embroiderers set up a cooperative so that they can actually have a sustainable living in a cooperative community in their own villages and do what they were doing, and then actually have a market for it. So they make some pieces to sell and some pieces to keep, some pieces for ritual. And this one, I love the name of this one. So Threads of Life, in 1998, 12 La Malera weavers asked for help establishing a cooperative. Threads of Life was established as a response to this, and each member of the new Sinta Badaya, literally the love of culture. So this is like the connection between like doing something, being able to earn a living at it, and also incorporating your culture and your identity into it. And then, importantly, they got back to natural dyes. So the other thing, next slide please, next slide please. Natural dyes. So the other thing is this tie to the environment. So with these groups, these cooperatives, there's a high level of environmental consciousness, right? It's not just that the dyes are natural, but of course they're growing the plants, or they're either foraging for the plants that are naturally in the environment, or they're growing the plants in small batches and harvesting themselves. So it's not a commercial production. It's very low impact on the environment and completely kind of like within the context and life cycle of what grows there. All right. And they're renewable, they're renewable resources. They're locally grown. They know when to harvest them and what to take. Next slide, please. So there's some examples of what they do. Those are both weavings, actually. And this stuff is incredible. Next slide, please. All right, so here's more information about a different cooperative, and it just gives you more information. So. Instead, villages that share a common identity and history may be spread over a large area, interspersed with various other groups. So historically, these art forms, these weaving in particular, here, weaving was tied to all sorts of things. It's integral to their lives, but then it just sort of like got, they stopped doing it because it takes a lot of time and they had to earn money. So now this group helps them organize so that they can do both. They can do things that they can use, like I said, and keep, and then also sell the things they want to sell. So, and I just like this part, textiles are central to maintaining that identity. They're filled with tiny but significant variations that identify the wearer's kingdom, clan, rank, marital status, and more. Color, they're coded with color, structure, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, yeah, it just talks about, so, and the work, this takes a lot of time. Of course I visited the production sites too, some of them, and it just, is it really intensive. The weaving takes a lot of time, the dyeing takes a lot of time, as it says, she redyes the threads as many as 16 times. Some of these techniques and weavings are only done like by these particular ethnic and cultural groups. They're not done anywhere else in the world. Some of them, of course, traveled. There's a lot of, hybridity and kind of intermixing of techniques, but it's fascinating. And actually, Indonesia is one of the, kind of like, as far as I know, one of the, touchstones for textile, like especially weaving and ICAT and stuff like that. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's some weavings in progress in the gallery/store. So they have a lot of like information and education in the store. And it's a gallery. I mean, these weavings, like some of them that you saw, for instance, are way out of my price range. They're like in the thousands of US dollars. I bought a nice scarf. I supported them where I could. I bought something like in the $25 range. But yeah, and people buy, many people buy the stuff. It's enough to support them, and it's like the first time they've ever gotten compensated. I mean, can you imagine working for a year on something and then getting like $20 for it? No, which is what used to happen before they had a centralized place to market their work and show it. Now they can actually oh yeah, it took 4 people 6 months, and guess what? We can live off the money now for another 6 or 8 months. Next slide, please. Okay, that's another picture of Threads of Life in the store with the weaving, with the mask. So they do a little bit of other stuff besides textiles, but it's almost all textiles and dyeing. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so more about the importance of culture and identity and heritage, because this is one of the things that I think is missing in Western discourse, and especially Western feminist discourse, but Western discourse in general, is that we have this idea that we're sort of like, floating heads, like we don't have any kind of history, social group identity, we're not embodied. But a lot of the places they work with, their store gallery is in Bali, but the cooperatives, the cooperatives are all over the island. Some of them are really remote. I've only been to the ones on Bali, actually, so far. I'm going to keep doing research with Threads of Life. So I'll give you a minute to read that. I won't read it to you. But it just talks more about how these, each group has its own weaving motif. It's fascinating. Okay. Yeah, next slide, please. That's the second part. I couldn't get them all in one slide, plus it would be really small. And again, here they, so when the market drops and they can't sustain themselves doing the way they used to do it because it takes a longer time, then they would switch to faster techniques, which included the synthetic dyes, but with the support of Threads of Life that gives them some initial seed money and then organizes the cooperative, then they're actually able to switch back to the natural dyeing techniques, which is, of course, more environmentally friendly and more based in the tradition. Next slide. Oh, wait, are people still reading? Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, okay, there's a bag. Okay, there's a bag. Yes, maybe next time I'll save up and get something like that. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so another group, so I've already talked about the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, then Threads of Life, which is in Indonesia, based in Bali, the gallery is based in Bali, and then Marketplace India is a smaller cooperative. SEWA is actually cooperatives and unions, and it actually, the overall structure defines itself as a union, and it's actually the largest women's union in the world. It's got a huge member of numbers, and remember it was started in 1972. So this one, Marketplace India, is much smaller. It doesn't have tens of thousands of members. It has about 500 members. It was started in 1980 in Mumbai, India, by two sisters who are Indian, Pushpika Fritas and Lalita Montero. Pushpika was trained in social work. She has a master's degree in social work, and her sister also does that, but her sister Lalita also does design and design work. So it started, I'll tell you just a little bit about how it started. I don't have this part written down, but I know it. So it started by, again, Pushpika was a middle-class Indian, and is still a middle-class Indian, although now she lives in the US. So she was, struck by the poverty in Mumbai, which, if you've seen Slumdog Millionaire or any number of other films that depict poverty in India, there's a lot of poverty. And so she was struck by the poverty, and she wanted to do something. Her mother had been a social worker. She was trained in social work. So first she started working with male lepers. And she started an organization that worked with people with disabilities, because lepers often lose their eyesight and they lose limbs, and they're social outcasts because it's highly contagious, and also you get a lot of deformities from leprosy because things are falling off. So she first started working with male lepers, and it was called Social Handicap and Rehabilitation Education, SHARE. So now the full name is Marketplace SHARE, because they still kept that part in, which is like the social programming part. But and they were making products, but then she switched. She began hearing stories from the women, actually, about how they kind of didn't have access to money, and how the conditions they were living in, sort of how they were maybe sometimes in situations of violence, and they felt they were trapped. So she switched her focus and started working with women, and she actually started working with just 3 women making a quilt. So they made a quilt, and they went and they sold it. They went to an expo, like an art fair, craft fair. They went to an expo, and they tried to sell the quilt, but the amount of money they could get for it didn't pay for the work and the time that had gone into it, right? So this is not a very effective way economically to try to get people an income to give them less than their time is worth. So then she kind of changed her strategy, and they started making clothing. And Pushpika had then moved to the US. She married someone in the US and moved. And she had she would visit the US, and she'd take a bunch of the products the women made, and then she'd have trunk shows, right? So she'd sell things out of her suitcase. Now this was really successful because the things are gorgeous. They're, again, beautiful block printing, tie-dye, batik, and it's all clothes. Actually, they make mostly women's clothes and some household products, and a few men's shirts. So when she started doing that, she realized, both with the wealth gap between the US and India, and the kind of niche market for beautiful ethnic things, in clothing in the US, that she would actually then export. So actually Marketplace India does not sell within India. It's a bunch of cooperatives. So they buy the cotton, so they don't have actually someone who produces the large bolts of white cotton that they buy from someone else, but then they have dyeing cooperatives, so they batik it themselves, or they tie-dye it themselves, or they block print it themselves, and then they have sewing cooperatives and embroidery cooperatives. So they make these wonderful products that again are richly designed, wonderful colors, and they market to the US so that they can charge an amount that actually can compensate the women for their labor. And the women actually, what they get is 3 times the average within where they are. Yeah, there's no minimum wage standards in India, so, So it's really interesting, and they're the ones, so when I was talking about the political action, now SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, also does political action. In fact, they've won a Supreme Court case in India. They're very politically active. They go to international, the World Labor Association, they go to organization, they go to the World Trade, WTO. So they're active and they go to international meetings. Now Marketplace is a lot smaller, but they're the ones who did the action about the rations. And they're actually the ones that went to the house where the woman moved out, and they went and yelled at the guy and said, "Stop abusing your wife," and what are you thinking? And she left with all her jewelry, and that's the only wealth a poor family has usually, is the gold jewelry that the woman was given and wears. So Marketplace India started small, got bigger. Now they have about 500 members. They have 13 cooperatives. Of the 13 cooperatives, 5 are fabric dyeing cooperatives, so they do the batiking and the tie dyeing. And then 8 are sewing and embroidery cooperatives. And I visited 8 or 9 of the 13. Some of the fabric dyeing ones are out pretty far away because they need a bigger space to do it in, and the rent is cheap. I have been to one fabric dyeing one. Again, most of the women in Marketplace India are educated to about 5th standard or 8th standard, so that's the equivalent of 5th or 8th grade. Some of them are semi-literate. I mean, most of them are semi-literate, some are not literate, and many of them have migrated again from rural areas to the urban area. And in India, each state has its own language, so Mumbai's in Maharashtra, and the language is Marathi, but each community also has its own language. So a lot of the women can't speak the language of the context that they're in. They can't speak Hindi, which is the national language. They can't speak Marathi, which is the state language. They certainly can't speak English, which only educated people can speak. So again, they're isolated. They don't have like the kinds of skills that they could use in jobs where they interact with people, right? Many of them can't read. A lot of them learn to read numbers for the first time or leave the house for the first time when they work for this organization. Many had never used the telephone, but they come to the office and maybe they have to make a call to see if the fabric will come. So they learn all these things through their work with Marketplace India. And again, usually most of them, except for the ones that work in the Widows Cooperative, most of them, are married and have families. They live with their children, their husband, and their in-laws. And most of them, so this little thing here is from their website, and it's part of their mission. It's not just about, like I said, having a job or having money or going in. It's actually for them, it's about having a better future. So most of the women, again in India, so there's still a lot of gender inequality, as there is everywhere still. But one of the ways that plays out is that if you have children, and some are girls and some are boys, the money will be used to further the boys' education. So just like these women were educated to the 5th or 8th grade, if they're poor, because it costs money, there's school fees for uniforms and books and stuff, so it costs money even for the public school, which it still costs money to send your kid to school. So usually girls don't go very far in school in poor families because, if there's not enough money to go around, the boy will go to school. So for these women, the first thing they do with their money that they're earning after food security is taken care of is they use it in their daughter's education. Their sons are already taken care of. It's not like they're like, oh, our daughter's going to go to school and the boys are going to stay home. No, it's the sons are still going to school. Now the daughters are also going to school. So the most important thing to them is that their children have a better life, better economically, educationally, more opportunities than they did. And it's an explicit part of this organization's mission to have those political actions. They are called social action groups. They also have a part that they do called Global Dialogue, where the women get together and talk about other countries and other situations, like during the Taliban, when they were making the women wear the burqa, the women in India got together and talked about that. And then another thing that they do is the groups, sometimes their social action project is about their neighborhood, like the sewers being covered. Sometimes it's about something that's happening statewide or nationally, like the rations. And then sometimes it's something for the women themselves, like one of the things a group wanted to do was to learn about health and inexpensive home remedies for health, for urinary UTIs and the common cold and digestion. So then that one group got together, the cooperative, and they learned about health and these remedies from someone who came in, and then they did peer education with the other cooperatives. And the learning that they did was through plays. Of course, it wasn't through reading because most of them aren't literate, but it was through plays and posters and performance and demonstration. So that's another, so the kinds of social actions that they do depend on the needs of the group, and the group determines those needs. So again, this is one of the things I like about the model, that it's not top down, that the kind of like the wisdom emerges from the group and the sense of direction emerges from the group and what's needed emerges from the group. Next slide, please. That's a picture of some of the women in Marketplace India. Not pictures from the website. I didn't take that. It's nice and clear. I would say that for me, learning about this model, which is environmentally conscious of human relations, interested in social equality, interested in gender equality, interested in a light footprint on the planet, both respectful of individual difference, but also fostering a collective sense and having people think about and encouraging social action and political action. This to me is a model for moving forward, and they're doing it. And like I said, it doesn't involve higher education, doesn't involve kind of like following a program or ideology. It's emerging out of their lives and what they're doing. And there's all these, like the psychological empowerment aspect. There's all these multiple aspects to it. Next slide, please. And then that picture, look, there's somebody not Indian in the middle. That's when that's the first year that I did my research with them. And I really get a lot when I do the research. Not just what I learned, but it's so empowering to be with these women who themselves are so powerful and who are just learning how to come into their power. And it's amazing. So it's amazing. And like I said, so I will just read you a couple quotes from the women to conclude. Okay. So I'll read you a few quotes that I skipped because I was just talking. So this is what I think about change and social change partly. Because the women in Marketplace Marketplace India share their knowledge and promote change within their communities, the scope of change looks like an inverted funnel, starting with a group of women within the cooperative, but broadening out to include each woman's extended family, her neighbors, and the community. They focus on particular local issues, and that helps each group to successfully set and reach their collective goals. But with each small success, they are encouraged to tackle larger issues. Asha says, quote, "If tomorrow I see something happening in my neighborhood, I will fight for change," end quote. Marketplace India not only provides each individual with knowledge, skills, and a fair wage, but also fosters a sense of solidarity and collective empowerment. This involvement at every level serves to empower the women at Marketplace India. The organization doesn't seek to control the production and programs of the various cooperatives. Instead, they facilitate the interaction among the various groups, and they coordinate the marketing of their products. Members of the cooperatives appreciate the fair working conditions and living wage that working with Marketplace India provides them. But their appreciation for their work goes far beyond that. Virtually everyone I interviewed thought of their co-op as a supportive community, almost like an extended family. Kavita says, quote, "The co-op is like a family. The first thing that came with the job is self-confidence, which I didn't have before because I never left the house and did not take public transportation," end quote. This newfound self-confidence is a result of the combination of the skills and abilities that they've achieved with relation to their work and the information and skills they've developed as a result of their social programs with which they are involved. Members of the co-ops not only make the fabrics of the garments and do hand sewing, they also run every aspect of the co-op, from keeping accounts to traveling to picking up supplies. Many of the women had never traveled alone before, even on a local train or bus. Most had never been responsible for large sums of money or even seen large sums of money. Some women knew only their local language and not Hindi or English, as I said, and at least one woman had never used a telephone before. Women who were members of all-female cooperatives said that one of the benefits of being a member of an all-women's group was that tasks were not assigned by gender. Sharda observes, quote, "If we were a mixed-gender group, then men would have taken up all the responsibility, but because there are no men, the women take on all the jobs, even the physically demanding ones," end quote. So this expectation is that the women are capable of participating in every aspect of running the cooperative, and each new experience that they have added to the sense of themselves as capable in ways that they hadn't previously realized. And this contributes to their self-confidence. Kavita exclaims, quote, "Everything I did increased my confidence, including buying buttons. A woman can do everything. I have proved that there's nothing women can't do," end quote. This increased self-confidence, combined with their newfound earning power, allows them to change some of the conditions of their lives. According to Sharda, quote, "The best part of my training is the education and information I am getting. Even if I'm not the smartest person in the room, just the feeling of sitting in that chair makes me feel equal and worthy," end quote. So, Mike, to conclude, I see all this as a model for social justice. The women that I talked to during my research of these grassroots organizations in India were able to make positive changes in their own lives as a result of their economic independence. One woman, who I talked about, left her abusive husband and returned only when he promised to stop the abuse. All of the women were sending their daughters to school past the average educational level, not just their own, but the average in India. And a widow who had contemplated suicide is able to support herself, her children, and her mother. Their role as wage earners gave these women the power to make financial decisions and to exert more control within the family. But more importantly, their experience as part of a collective in which they were each given responsibility for decision making and were introduced to tasks and roles that went beyond traditional women's roles, facilitated a sense of empowerment that translated into a newfound ability to create change, both in their individual lives and collectively. As Sunanda so beautifully put it, quote, "Work is something that everybody needs, and only when you have work do you have human dignity," end quote. Social justice must attend to people's basic survival needs, and the need for decent work with decent pay and safe working conditions, as well as the need for marginalized groups to be both recognized as members of a specific group and treated fairly. And finally, social justice must acknowledge the interconnections among the local and the global, not only by recommending global guidelines and goals, but by looking at the effects of global economic policy on local communities, including their environment, land, communities, and traditions. That's it.
Thank you. I've got two questions, so we can start off and then everyone can have a discussion.
All right.
Two, so one question from Margaret is, how does this fit with your other research? Like when you were a philosopher, like writing about Foucault, is there, some connection or, because you talk about power dynamics and things. And the other question for everyone is, how does this change our open sentences? So
how does it change what?
This morning we were doing open sentences where we were talking about how we see the world is and how it's becoming and stuff. And obviously what Margaret's shown us is quite a positive example of people's. And does it change what we said to each other? So maybe we should answer that one first so you can think about the other one. So does it change anybody's open sentences? Good or bad or,
I think my open sentences are kind of neutral. They can kind of go in different directions. So I'm done.
Well, I didn't do the open sentences, but I listened, and it feels to me like, well, first of all, I don't know why, but that quote about the woman saying, "I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm so happy," I just started crying. Like, ugh, I'm so furious at this situation. And it's not like this is the first time I've encountered this data or anything. I've been working on social change stuff for a long time, and specifically around sex and sexuality. But I just feel like the kind of queer theory that you were bringing up in the Anthropocene is like this very kind of, of the world of the United States and of this kind of northern dominant structure. And it's exactly the same, but from a very different angle with a lot more resources under its feet to basically say, we need to dismantle these structures in the way that they are. And it's going to come from people that are marginalized and in trauma, and that can actually see, that not only see, but have survived being punished and are, of that minority space. So I think it really, and, I've been looking at I have friends that are doing micro-lending banks and all these different things, and it's basically always the person that's the most vulnerable, the most on the bottom, it has our greatest potential and seeds of change. And that's where we feed. So I'm just sitting here quaking with rage and delight.
When you said that quote, I felt good. Like when she was talking
I
about,
do too.
like, oh wow, that's really good, because a lot of women feel like that anyway, you know what I mean? It's hard to admit. I think the thing is, it's hard to admit things like that, so it's just saying something like that you didn't feel confident. And lots of people here probably feel that anyway. You know, most women experience that anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it's just validating.
Yeah.
I think what that creates, like when you're traumatized, it actually prevents sort of cognitive synapses from coming together. So it actually keeps people unable to learn. Like physically, they can't absorb information or knowledge. So I think having that community where they're able to rebuild synapses and make connections and feel secure and kind of get out of the habit of the trauma that they're in is like it's breaking a behavioral pattern, and it's breaking kind of victimization as well, and that's kind of what I see happening. So that lady's saying, I don't care if I'm the stupidest person in the room, I'm here. It's quite a nice thing, but it's also showing that she's breaking away of a pattern of thought, which is nice.
Yeah, I'm here and I count.
Yeah.
As for me, I especially like the part of where you had a quotation from one of the ladies, and she said that I'm not here to be helped, but I'm here to work. And this is a very nice insight into probably the Indian culture. But still, I believe this behavioral pattern or these thoughts can be intrinsic to any human being, and that's what makes it universal in terms of that.
I feel envy. Envy. As a man.
What is envious?
During my 20s, I was joining what the people in Panama, the feminists in Panama were calling, what was the kind of macho solidario, you know, feminist activism, and then you are just back and joining.
You can be a feminist too.
I am. I am, and I am. Look, how was the evolution of my feminism? Yeah, it started like this. Probably something when I was a kid, because this capability to repair things I learned from my grandfather and my aunt. Yeah, you build up something, you repair, you make. I don't know, plumber. You are a plumber. You are, my aunt. My grandfather and his daughter, my aunt. Then when I was in the university, I became this active feminist. I was classified by feminists. She nicely called me, you are a macho solidario. Then I went out and I started sharing with people from different ethnical groups. I was doing in Panama as a matter of friendship, then in an academic way. And I discovered that at least in my macho Latino culture, it is better to work together with women because they are more organized, and it comes out of oppression. You are at home and you are educated for being a homemaker. And so I wanted my homemaking to be respected, so I did much better. Just sharing the same house with a Mexican girl, no problem. Just sharing the same house instead of a Mexican man. Yeah, it was catastrophic. Don't say it in Mexico. Then I moved to Germany, and I made a step backwards because I was an oppressed man. Yeah, and it was a woman oppressing me every day. Don't put it in the TV. And everything started to change again, and I started to say, probably I need to be a little bit like this crazy macho religion, because I mean, you are going to look for jobs, you get nothing. You have 50% less chances to get a job, to get a position. You find, I went in my university, it was in Göttingen, I went to the, how to say, equal opportunities office in order to look for help, you know, I needed, I mean, I was a minority, and so on. No, you are not a woman, you cannot come here, you need to go somewhere else. And suddenly I was completely isolated, and I didn't know what to do. And now it is being better. Still I am looking for a way, and perhaps what I am learning here is a topic I have been receiving information in different, you know, congresses and so on. But what I've been learning here from you is the following. If you are in a vulnerable situation, probably what you need to do is learn from other people who has been vulnerable, and then try to learn something for enhancing your own situation, because you are vulnerable. So women have a lot of experience being oppressed, fighting against oppression, and so on, and we, the men, we don't have it. That's why I'm envying. So perhaps the change I will do is just that, okay, try to better understand which are the aspects of my life making me vulnerable, and then looking for probably other men. Yeah, and try to share with each other, at least sitting on the chair, it helps. The problem is that we used to do it in pubs, and, you know, we drink and so on, and perhaps the macho point of view will dominate the aspect. I mean, I like it. I like my beer. I like my, you know, my football, and, you know. But usually as men we don't try to go beyond. We just watch soccer, have a smoke, someone, and get a big beer and so on, and you spread out for 5 minutes or 2 hours, and then that's all. And no, we need to give a continuation to that. And women are more experienced than us for it.
But you feel more protected in that macho culture, though. It's safer.
Yeah, because I try to imagine you are a macho solidario all life long. Women are,
and suddenly you're on the out, and then you're in line.
Women are nice with you when you are a kid, when you are a teenager. You are becoming macho solidario, and then you marry someone, and then you are in an oppressive situation where the women are suppressing you, and you go to the equal opportunities office in order to look for help, and if you are not a woman, you don't get it. Try to imagine.
So the whole culture is built this way.
It became the other way around. I said, well, wait a minute, you started as a macho solidario, and that's the solidarity you are getting. At the end of the day, something I realized some years ago is that an intelligent person is an intelligent person. A nice guy is a nice guy. It doesn't matter the color, the language, gender, transgender, gay. I don't mind. I just want to be with someone nice, emotionally intelligent, mentally intelligent, and not boring. That's all. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the only important thing. I mean, the rest is just bullshit.
Well, when I worked with, I used to teach sex ed and do sexuality education and advocacy for 12 years in another lifetime before fully investing in the art. And I was working with Planned Parenthood and working with rural youth. And I was teaching these teenagers, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go in and save all the girls, all the self-esteem issues. And the boys were just like in the corner. So I do think that ultimately and I still feel you have to prioritize women because they're the discrepancy of that relationship to power and even the consciousness, the seed is going to be held in women, because the rate of rape and trauma and abuse and sex trafficking, and I mean, it's just, if we really unfolded and unpacked the suffering of the female body over this last, you know, epic of trauma in this, it could crush you like a bug if you really felt it, and any of us, and that doesn't mean that men haven't been suffering, but it's just, we're kind of been in a state of enslavement and of varying degrees of experience of it. And I do think that there's a seed to tend to it, but inside that seed is an awakening and a healing for men that is equally as painful and traumatic. I mean, these boys that were like 13, if they had any expression of sensitivity or tenderness, they were fags and hazed by all the other guys to quickly shore that up, that emotional intelligence and ability to connect with somebody they're attracted to and take those vulnerable risks. And they were like hazed back into being like a rabid dog that was like, the bitch, let's, you know, I'm gonna fucking tap that bitch, or whatever. They were, you know, like they had to go into this language of rape. Or they were a fag. I mean, and that was it. That was all the piano scales they got. There were 2 keys. And girls had more.
And can we ask men why? I mean, I'd be interested. Eric, what do you think? I'm interested. I feel like you've got a lot to say. There's something that's, you know what I mean? There's something, I just feel, because you're not really
it's all identity.
macho.
I mean, we're all stuck in these identities, and it's a defense mechanism. It does protect us all, wherever we are. So how do you break out of those circles, and how those boundaries start to dissolve? I don't know. I mean, when you have a bigger enemy, sometimes it seems like that starts to break those down. I mean, maybe we can all unify against Trump land. I don't know. Maybe that's what it takes.
Okay, so a common enemy. So climate change is not a common enemy because it's faceless. You know what I mean? It doesn't have a face.
We don't know. You're right. We don't know how to look at that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's about men having more conversations. I think what you're saying about it starting with women is totally true, but also I think the side that men start to have conversations as well around the imbalance is equally as important, because we're kind of, like you were saying, like it kind of gives you this sense of protection, like going back to these kind of men are stronger, we're like this, we do stuff, we do the manual work, and actually that protection is a fear almost. We're kind of scared of losing this kind of being in a sense of not knowing. I think men's position in the world is changing for the good, but I think that kind of period of transition is quite difficult for a lot of men, because we've still got this kind of overhang of the old tradition of men being strong and boys being like going out there and kind of tackling the world and actually that disconnection from the emotional side and disconnection from your emotions is incredibly damaging for a lot of young men, because to talk about your emotions, to talk about sensitivity is seen as a weakness, and it's not a weakness, it's a strength, but the way we've been conditioned is that it is weak. And that's kind of sad, because you've got a situation now where a lot of young men are completely lost, but they can't talk about it because they shouldn't talk about it. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that this is women. It's important that women become more powerful, but also we are experiencing a serious kind of issue in young men that around like drug abuse, around suicide, around sexuality, around all these things that we have to kind of kind of hidden, because men are not seen to be emotional. So I think it's also about these different kind of conversations that men should start having as well, and kind of and being open and finding strength in being open rather than kind of stereotypical going down to the pub, and I don't do that, like, but you know, the kind of idea of going down to the pub and kind of slapping each other on the back and like talking about stuff that kind of reinforces this kind of image of male identity that actually is bullshit, really.
But I was just going to say, but I don't think it's just younger men. I think that men who are in their 40s and 50s, we're seeing a lot of suicides in men in that age group, because, like you say, the current dominant, it's changing, and they really don't feel it because they're of an older generation, so they're not millennial, they're not into social media, you know, so they're really out of that, you know. Yeah, there's like waves and waves of men who will never get to be the wise elder, because if they all, you know, people who commit suicide when they're 50 will never get the knowledge, so it's like a disruption in the continuality. So that's really, to me, that's really disturbing. Like white, middle class, 50-year-old men who have everything, they're killing themselves. You know, that's really disturbing in a weird way.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just thinking because like someone was in front of me was watching Moonlight on the plane, and I don't know. Has everyone seen that? But like I didn't even have to listen to the text again, but was crying, and it's all about this. I mean, in that situation, the character is, I think, experiencing these feelings, but how much, and I think it happens on these levels, these different layers of like culture and class, but this enforced systems of masculinity and oppression that kind of don't allow people to ever be who they are. But maybe then like men need to help each other. Instead of like you're sort of saying like we do need to have these structures that still support women.
Oh yeah,
but
I'm
then,
not
like,
saying that shouldn't, I mean,
I
I think like these kind of things, like economic, like the real practical, the first chakra, like getting women out of the position where they have no choice, that they're truly in an enslavement, is the liberation of men. Is this the most potent action for that seed? But I spent years completely having my mind flipped that in those groups with those young kids, I focused on the boys because their trauma, we've had several waves of feminist movement that are articulating. So like, yes, they were wearing these weird slutty shoes and wearing corsets and talking, you know, about like, I did give a blowjob in a party, and you know, like they definitely were traumatized and working it out in the culture, but they were like, I'm going to college and I have, you know, I have this range of emotion that I can feel and work it out, and it's complicated and messy and not making sense, but I have access to it, and the boys didn't even have access. And I completely agree that especially when you have that first chakra basis covered, then it's really kind of this conversation for like, what is a men's movement that isn't just drumming down the moon, that's going to pull in, you know, a couple of my friends. and I do think, again, like a queer male voice is really interesting in this conversation, which a lot of my community is, because it's a place I really see men giving themselves that full piano scale. And you don't have to be queer, but the idea of allowing and healing these wounds, because I think, the threat for a man to slip outside of that zone that's so tiny of what's available to them in that mainstream culture, it's totally annihilating. It's so humiliating to express and expose vulnerable, sensitive, complicated emotions that aren't hitting in the like bromance in the bar. And not to say that doesn't, there's a place for that too. I'm not expressing any negative stance on masculinity, but it's just, there's just as much wound in that. So yeah, I hope I didn't articulate that I think it's just women.
No.
Yeah.
No, I was saying that's kind of what I saw in what you were saying. I was going to make a bad joke about plastics. Like, you're all getting more estrogen anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Are you going to say something?
Well, I guess having a twin brother growing up, you could see a lot of frustration at his inability to express himself in his true way, and he did a lot of like identity changes in Crisis, where I just was me from the get-go and didn't delineate too much. But on the other hand, he's incredibly adept at understanding societal structures, strategies, and philosophy in a way that is far beyond me, just because he's been all these different people and he's had to keep his taps on, and now he's having this really amazing awakening as a man, where I do think he could be a pretty good elder. So I think, and that's like, he was always 7 years behind me on every epiphany, every age kind of associative understanding. And it would be really cute, he'd be 18 and, like just coming onto something that I'd long ago discovered, but not really shared with him because there was no point, because he hadn't years. He like wasn't there mentally, like kind of testosterone and vibrating in this different frequency, where it's like, yeah, he's not interested. I'm not going to share that. And then he would be all excited and share this thing with me and be like, wow, that's amazing. But yeah, I think we learn at different levels. What they say, that women change a lot more, a lot quicker. We become different people at different stages of our lives, perhaps, and women do it more frequently. So, and men take longer, and they have like these kind of larger gaps. But there's definitely a problem. I'm not saying there's not a problem. I mean, there's a reason that boys are like failing school and dropping out of school, and that they're trying to change the tests, which are originally kind of designed for the way that men think, which now men are failing and women are excelling in. It's interesting, right? So let's change the tests, let's lower them. Because we need more men to pass. So we need like about 50% men in college now, and but that's a worldwide thing happening. It's just, so there's something else going on, and maybe it's like a lack of imagination for the future, or an inability to see how usefulness can be applied into the future, right? So, but I think that's a crisis amongst us all, and I think that that's a question that's maybe about changes in technology and open population and resources, and just like as our jobs are being replaced as well, and by machines, and who are we as people, and how are we important, and how do we see ourselves in the society? So I think in general there's a crisis on both sides, and it's rightly so. That's
Okay, this will be the last.
Okay, I just wanted to relate it to the creative writing world, because a few of you said last night that lots of emotions were coming up in the second exercise. When I teach my creative writing classes, the majority of people who come are women, because if men come, they're putting themselves in a position of vulnerability. So I would say in my classes of 12, I have 10 women to 2 men, and sometimes just 1 man. And I think that's really interesting, that even at that level, doing a leisure class, if you're retired, or if you just want to do something for entertainment, those issues are coming through. And also the publishing world, women are disadvantaged there, because men generally will only read books written by men, whereas women will buy books written by men and women. And that sounds crazy, but there are statistics that prove this over and over again.
And the same for cinema as well. We'll watch stars that are men and women, because we can become both mentally.
But it's all like a little
little films that you can actually identify or like award without like there's not really like a female like protagonist, and then like if there are, then
Because we're used to having to identify with protagonists.
Okay, sorry,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
just got
Anyway.
to wrap up because
Yeah.
of the lunch and everything. But thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you.
Really, really.